Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth from PDA North America, and we are so thrilled to have our friend Sally Cat here today. She's been an amazing contributor of ours and a partner of ours over the last couple years, and today she's going to be sharing her story with us. Without further ado, Sally Cat.
Okay, hello everyone. There's people here from all over the world, which is really exciting. The presentation I've put together for today came from a little aside I made at the end of a webinar I gave for PDA North America last year. Where I said, if I answer any more questions, I'll be giving you my whole PDA life. And Diane and Ruth from PDA North America said, hey, that actually sounds quite good for a webinar. So since I don't know, before January, I've just been making these in-depth illustrations of my life, which some of you will have seen on my Facebook page. If my ADHD and PDA brain decide to do something, I let them do it. So I've got all these illustrations, which I finished the last one a few hours ago. So normally I'm a lot more structured in what I present. This time I've got a wealth of images and a bit less structure, but hey, it's PDA, isn't it? So I'm just going to get up the slideshow and I need to go first to share, and then we find that, and then we go, where are we? Come back, play from start. So is that sharing, Ruth? It is cool. So I have got amongst my multiple neurodiverse conditions, which I've gradually been collecting like brownie badges, well, the awareness of, I was born with them. Um, One of them is synesthesia, calendar synesthesia, or time space, which means I have a sort of video photographic memory from dating back to about 6 months of age, which I've always just loved. And so I can clearly remember being a little baby on Brighton Beach in England, just loving the senses, loving the rhythm of the sea, everything for me, the colours, the sounds, the textures was a sensory delight for me. So, and I think they say with PDA babies, often we are very passive. My own daughter was, she'd stare off into space. But then as I grew up, when my mum said no, I would just go into complete terror and despair. You know, if you see a little toddler saying what you might think of as a tantrum, you think, oh, they just need to get over it, just tell them no, stop. But that no, stop to me, that was like the end of a world where I couldn't imagine the horror of not having that pretty doll I'd seen in a shop window or whatever. And the more I got upset, the more my mum got impatient, the worse it was. She'd snap, I'm never taking you in town again. And that, the pain of that I can still feel. Um, so it wasn't a good family dynamic at home. The roles when I was growing up, I was just sort of shunned and ignored. My mother, um, I'll just say now that I think all of us, and actually my father was actually my stepfather, but it was too complicated for me to put that into my presentation. All PDA with different presentations. This is my belief after 10 years of exploring PDA and reflecting on my family members in conjunction with other PDA adults I've spoken with. So my mum, she played the dramatist. See how I suffer. Oh, the children are ruining my lives. My brother was the golden boy. He'd stay next to her. He fawned to her. My stepfather, he would um, spend 3 days lying in bed in a bad mood, so he had to tiptoe around the house and smash the house up, then run off with all the money and spend it on drink and cannabis or whatever, and didn't work. So it was a very stressful, scary place to grow up in. I was scapegoated by my mother and her golden boy, my older brother. They blamed all the trouble on me. It was my fault. My stepdad got into a bad mood again. She even said it was my fault that she had my younger brother when he was born. I go into all of this more in my mini memoir of my childhood, which is on Amazon. It's called Calendar Girl after my calendar synesthesia. and all the profits from that go to PDA Society. You can get it free on Kindle Unlimited. At school, I was an outcast. They laughed at me, they bullied me for not having the proper local accent, for being too smelly, for being too scruffy, for using long words, for just about anything. So I hated school. I tried to avoid school as much as I possibly could. I pretended to be sick in the morning to get off school. My older brother, he also pretended to be sick to avoid school. He gave me tips on how to best fool our mum. He said, like, rubbing your forehead really quickly can make it seem like you've got a temperature before she comes into the room. Pretend you've got a tummy bug or a headache because you can't see it. When I was older, I took to playing truant and sneaking around the streets. I once got followed by a pervert. When I was 7, I made a friend in brownies. We were complete tearaways. I was 7, she was 8. Neither of us could ever sleep at night. Now I know we both had delayed sleep phase syndrome, but we'd sneak out at night at midnight and wander the city. We started smoking, got the older girl next door to me to pierce our ears. We went out shoplifting. We broke into schools during the holidays and vandalized them. We just did all these terrible, dangerous things. And it made me feel so empowered, a power I'd never felt I had before. And it was also breaking all these demands which had been restricting me. It'd always been the demand, as I was a scapegoated child who was blamed for everything, to demand that I should just not exist, really, that my feelings didn't count. And so this was a brilliant, brilliant freedom for me. As we got older, my friend Anne, she was a year older than me, she became punk with her friends, and her group of friends, they all said, no, you're not, you can't be a punk, you're too young or whatever. And I know in future I learned you just be what you want to be. But at the time, my family had taught me that what I wanted didn't count. And my feelings didn't count. If I said I'm upset to my mum about what she said to me, she'd say she didn't mean it like that. I'd got it all wrong. And so I'd learned to accept. And also Anne had always put me down as well. I'd put up with that. I expected it. And I was grateful just to have her friendship. So I was excluded again. We both got into sniffing glue. I didn't draw in all the other punks or whatever because it would be distracting, and also my demand avoidant brain didn't want to do that much detail. But we wanted basically to have an oblivion from our individual pain, anguish. All of the people in that group I worked out came from broken homes. We didn't fit in well with society. I went to more and more desperate measures to avoid school, as I mentioned before. So I was going to school about sort of average of half a days of a week. I was skiving off as much as I possibly could. Needless to say, I didn't do very well in school. After I left school, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to be the underdog anymore. I wasn't going to be the person everyone said wasn't included. I had what I called my big change. My friends had moved on mostly from being punk, but I didn't care. I became a punk. I got into anarchist punk music because I liked the lyrics. And I thought from now on, I'm going to be free. I'm going to be in power. I've got this makeup on and this hair. So if people are staring at me, it's because I'm in control of it. And that felt good. I was siphoned into getting a job when I'd finished school, and I just couldn't cope. I had a job in the civil service. I used up all my holiday entitlement immediately and then quit after 3.5 weeks anyway. I just couldn't cope with the environment, the people, the dynamics, the confusion, the hours, the having to look a certain way, not being able to leave. The whole thing was just too much for me. So I was unemployed. I've drawn in a period gas fire. I don't know if they have them in your country, but it's not on to indicate I couldn't afford heating. reduced price food. And that was how I lived. I did a lot of artwork to pass the time. I was lonely because I didn't have the social skills just to make friends. The few friends I had, they weren't always, they were having their own lives. So that was my life. Anne, who I pictured next to me, second from the left, she had this really cool group of friends who they went to a cool Gothic nightclub and they drank and went out, and they had enough money to buy things like packets of crisps to pass around on the table, money I couldn't dream of having. And I would beg to join them, but I found myself what's classed as situationally mute or selectively mute, some people call it. I was too anxious to speak. And I had an obsession, a completely helpless love obsession on one of the guys. And I couldn't speak or move when he was there. And afterwards, I'd analyze it all in my diary. So yeah, I hated it. I hated not being able to speak. I wanted to speak, I wanted to join in, but I couldn't. My big change had failed. So I felt really, really depressed in life. At that point, I had a very bad acid trip, which completely freaked me out. But yeah, I moved on. I got into adult education. I dropped in and out of multiple courses, eventually did psychology and sociology, A-level, art GCSE, where I was the first student ever to get scored 100%. I did really badly in art in school, obviously. But I still found it difficult to get on with the other students. The guy there I've drawn, I found out years later he'd resented at how I was always so attention seeking. But the way I dressed, it was really because that's how much I felt I stood out. So I was just reflecting it. And then I made a boyfriend, Max, and he made money selling drugs, not as a business to get rich on, just as a way of supporting a lifestyle. At the time, we were aware that there was this big cultural vibe of evil drug dealers, and it wasn't like that at all to us. It was just, I used to think there should be a TV drama about it, to show these drug dealers are normal people. Some are evils, most of them are bumbling idiots, you know, and a lot of them are very community minded. But yeah, I know there's a lot of prejudice or a lot of fear, and there's been a lot of bad stories, but this is my story. And we got into the rave scene. Well, Max got in first, and I followed him in. And his drug sales were suddenly in very high demand from the expanded social circle we had. It was brilliant with Max. I had access to all these people which I'd felt unable to speak with before because of my situational muteness. And with the party drugs, ecstasy and stuff, I could speak to them. It was brilliant. That's all I wanted to do, really. But the bombardment of customers coming round to Max's apartment, flat we call it in England, which I'd sort of moved into, I'd stopped going out with him, but remained as his best friend. Well, I was his living, what like it or not, best friend who'd taken his bed, so he slept on the floor. But there you go. I might have been very internalizing, but I was still controlling. And I'd go round to parties with a pile of cassettes saying, play that one, play that one, play that one. Before that, I'd go to the alternative night club. Um, so that kind of situationally mute still, but I'd go up to the DJ so I didn't know with records I'd brought along in my bag saying, play that one, I'm going to stand there till you've played it. So yeah. But I discovered in the rave scene that people still reacted to me as if there was something wrong with me. Didn't know why. Always people reacted to me like that. I had no idea what I was saying or doing that might put people off. Then I had the idea of setting up a harm reduction rave stall where we gave out free water, we gave away leaflets, factual leaflets about what drugs did, both good and bad, so people could make their own mind up. I was inspired into the harm reduction stuff when one of the outreach workers came round and recruited me to do some artwork. I'd also been painting UV paint backdrops for raves. So within all the rave scene, I was flourishing. No one had told me to, but I think it's an example of how PDA, if you just leave a PDA person to their own devices to follow their own direction, we will do stuff when we want to, but we don't fit the standardized, this is how you have a career and how you make money. We might want to, we don't want to starve from not working, but we can't do the normal career path. We ended up backpacking in central Turkey. There's a backstory to that, which I won't go into, but we did have a very, very madcap plan to drive overland to India. And thank God the van got stolen, because I hate to think what scrapes we'd have ended up in if we'd actually done that. So we ended up in central Turkey, and we just loved the exotic culture. We loved the way the people were so friendly, and they treated us as if we were worthwhile people. Back home in England, we were treated as just the surplus generation who no one wanted. There was hardly any jobs, mass unemployment. But in Turkey, people, they believed in us, and that was wonderful. And this guy who actually became my boyfriend, a Turkish guy called Fikret, he said he wanted to open the first disco in the village. Would we manage it? So he said, yes, let's do it. So we opened this disco in the middle of Turkey. And we're also running a guest house. And I found myself just staring at the clock hand. I have this little room with a tiny little a broken bit of wall going directly into the disco. So if I tried to have a break, I couldn't. And I was just realized I was going mad. It wasn't long after that, but I fled. Back in England, I mean, I've been seeing counsellors on and off on my almost zero income whenever I could access them, because I've been wanting to sort out what my difficulties were in life. Why did I keep having social issues? Why couldn't I stay and work? Why was I always awake at night and not able to sleep? All these issues. Why did I have so much anxiety? So I kept on seeing counsellors, and slowly I was unraveling the difficulties I had. But, I still couldn't work. In the meantime, Max had got into a right state. We were living in different apartments by then. I would come round, and this is an illustration of one scene where I saw him, and he said he'd been awake for 7 consecutive days without any sleep, and he just wanted to go out looking smart. And he had his top on inside out and back to front. And he got caught by the police with drugs on his possession, and he got sent to prison for 3.5 years. I was really worried about him, but I spoke to him on the phone after he got in, and he said he was the happiest he'd ever been, and he sounded it. I was so relieved, and it sorted him out in prison. He learned to do catering, and he's now doing really well in life, whereas I had my own life to go on. So I went to art college. I wanted to do graphic design, but they insisted I did fine art. So I said only if I can do all my projects on Turkey, because I'd started going back to Turkey on my own with whatever of a few friends I wasn't situationally mute with, I could persuade to come out with me sometimes completely alone. It was a long journey. It would be an overnight bus from my city to a London airport. Then you'd have to wait around in the airport all night. Then it would be waiting around in Istanbul from morning until the evening for a night bus, which took 11 hours, all without sleep, so about 2 days non-stop travel to get to this village. But I did it because I loved it. It's somewhere I felt that I could be me and I was valued, which I didn't feel in England. I even persuaded my art tutor to go out to Turkey, which she did. But out there, one of the Turkish boyfriends I had, Bardish, he was very angry with me, but I'd not come out with lots of money, because this is what happened there. Backpackers would go there and they would make lots of money in whatever Western country they lived in and come back, and they would invest this into a business. And that was the system there. But obviously I couldn't earn money in England because I couldn't work. So it took me 20 years to understand why he'd been so pissed off with me, to be honest. And he'd say to my friends, are all English people like Sally? But I just didn't understand what he expected. Back in England, I enrolled at university because I wanted to use the student loan to buy a Turkish bar. However, that year they changed the student loan system in England into 3 installments instead of one lump payment. And also I discovered the course, which was multimedia art. I absolutely loved it. Of course, I did all my projects on Turkey still. And it was through there I saw a checklist in the student union cafe bar place for dyslexia. I thought, wow, I check lots about how confused left and right all the time. It said, did you have trouble learning French at school? I thought, crikey, I've had trouble learning Turkish. So I had a dyslexia assessment, and my student friend was assessed. She was diagnosed with dyspraxia. So I wanted to be diagnosed, assessed with dyspraxia too, which I insisted on. So I ended up with both diagnoses. Also, it made me happy. I'm sorry if it's showing off. I was brought up being treated as if I was completely stupid. I discovered I had the assessor said I had a genius IQ, which made me so happy and surprised after how I'd been treated as a stupid idiot who got everything wrong all the time. I didn't know what to do when I finished uni because I couldn't work still. I knew I couldn't work. All the students were planning to get work. We had to do a placement year it was a 4-year degree. So I begged the head of course, please find me something. I can't go off to London. I can't work. He got me a in university placement. The funding ran out halfway through. I just carried on doing it. I didn't care. I just ran up credit card debts. For me, I'll just do something. I've never had the control to say, oh, I'm going to save money. I'm going to work these hours and then I'll be financially secure. I've never been able to do that. But I saw a poster for fully paid scholarships to Australia for media graduates. So I thought I'll apply for that because that's something I could do. I could do education. I just couldn't work. So I managed to get that. So I went out to Australia for a year and I absolutely loved it at first. I loved the different culture. I loved seeing the kangaroos around. I loved the food. I loved the people. But after 6 months, I got really, really homesick, especially when it was winter, when my body was saying it's supposed to be summer now. We can't be going into winter again. We had winter in England. So I went back to England and my homesickness was cured because the landlord of one of the city's hippest pubs, he approached me, ended up being his girlfriend, and there I was transplanted into the middle of this vibrant social scene, right in the middle. I could just sit there and it was all there for me. Because I knew I was dyspraxic, I overcame my fear or self-doubt about playing darts. I knew why I was clumsy. I knew it was a learning difficulty, so I could learn. I rebranded the whole pub. I did all their posters. I'd work for 32 hours or more on a poster, and my boyfriend would pay me the equivalent of 2 hours minimum wage, but I didn't care. And he financed me. I had free accommodation. Um, and I even ended up being the quiz reader there when he was too drunk coming back from a cricket trip one day. That absolutely terrified me at first, but then I loved it. But of course, I had no power. This being the centre of a social scene was from him. And when he dumped me after 3.5 years, I just completely fell apart. I now know that this is RSD, which gets talked about, rejection sensitive dysphoria, but it truly felt like I'd been sawn in half. I could feel it. I just fell apart. If you ever read, I don't know, you hear descriptions of someone who's heartbroken that food tastes like ash. That's what it was like for me. I lost I can't remember the American equivalent. I think it's American dress size. I looked it up, size 12 down to size 6 within a few weeks because I lost so much weight. I cut my hair off again and bleached it. And I turned down 2 counsellors until I found one I felt okay with. I waited 6 months for that. And she helped me to feel okay, to stop being terrified of being alone, which was brilliant. But I also learned on my own to follow my intuition. And that meant I actually argued with my counsellor saying, no, I'm doing this my way. And that was so pivotal to me in taking control of my own life and finding out who I was. So because of following my intuition actually screamed at me to get together with a man who I wouldn't have got together in a million years because he wasn't trendy or whatever. But it made me dream about him 2 nights in a row. So I said, okay, then intuition, I trust you. And we got together and we're still together now. And our daughter's now 13. So, that worked. Listen to intuition, not like this exciting bells and, oh, I've fallen in love. No, don't do that. That's my advice anyway. But if there's PDA people listening, of course, you'll do what you want. And so should everyone. So we had a baby. And I noticed with my mum, I also started training to be a counsellor as well. The way she was to me, the way she'd always been scapegoating me and blaming me for things and um, making me feel guilty with the way she said things or ignoring things I wanted to pay attention on, that felt wrong to me because I had my own baby and I thought I wouldn't be like that to my baby. And I had this protective feeling of my daughter. So when my mum, she'd get very sort of melodramatic, seeming hysterical, for example. Oh my God, I can't bear to see your pets, I'm probably starving. And then my daughter would start crying, and my maternal instinct overcame my ingrained subservient to my mother. Before, if I said to my mum, what you're saying hurt me, she would just twist it back, saying, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Or sometimes I'd really stand up to her and tell her how much she'd upset me. And she'd come back to me 10 years later, I kid you not, analysing it all, telling me why I'd got it wrong and how much it had upset her. But having my own baby changed that. But I still couldn't work out if she was deliberately being emotionally abusive and neglectful, um, or if she didn't know what she was doing. I couldn't understand her. So I went to see a counsellor specifically to work out if her abuse was deliberate. The counsellor told me, like I explained, I told her with an open heart, like exactly what I experienced with my mum. And she said from her experience working with victims of abuse, my mum was definitely emotionally abusive and neglectful. And it had to be conscious on her part, narcissistic personality disorder, or it had to be some kind of psychosis for her not to realise she was doing it. And it was at that time I came across an autism checklist on Facebook, it happened, which included masking and social mimicry, and that resonated with me. So I went back to it and I looked through and thought, actually, all these things fit me. So by this point, this was just after I decided to sever my mum from my life, if necessary, forever, because I knew I had to do it in order to put down my own strong roots to grow in, because she was constantly undermining me and putting me back down to just low self-esteem and not believing in myself and falling apart. So I had to do that. It's one of the hardest things I ever did because I still had that child to mother link to her. It wasn't easy to break that bond, but I knew I had to. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'm autistic. Back in England, then it was quicker to get a diagnosis than it is now. And I was diagnosed within a few months. And I thought, hooray, finally, autism makes sense of who I am. Finally, finally I understand why I've always had social problems, why I've always struggled, why people have misread me, why I've always masked. So I joined online forums to chat with fellow autistics, but what they were saying wasn't anything like my own experience. They were talking about masking being something forced onto them by neurotypicals, and it didn't benefit anyone except the neurotypicals. But that's not my experience. I've always masked because I just have. And I just didn't feel that they were my tribe at all. I've noticed that my daughter, she was behaving similar to me. I could see it, my partner, her dad couldn't. But I noticed she was situationally mute in nursery. She had this really high anxiety as a baby. If we got to be changing, as you say in America, your diapers, nappies in England. If there was a mirror in the changing room, we had to hide it for a bag because if you saw people reflected, she would go into hysterical screaming, crying, panic. But she'd been brought up very differently to how my mum brought me up, I've been very, very protective of her. So why was she like that? And then I discovered PDA just at about the time that my daughter was going to be assessed with her own autism, just before her 4th birthday. It was a UK TV series of Libby Hill, who I know is watching, called Born Naughty, where it looked into various sort of invisible conditions which children may have. And I thought, my goodness, PDA fits me, although I wasn't this sort of explosive child during my childhood. So I looked for information, but all the information was about explosive children, nothing about adults. The only thing for adult PDA was a small Facebook group. So I joined that, and suddenly I found my tribe. This group of people were all saying, "What, you too, you too?" It wasn't like that with other autistic people. It was like, "What, you also move other people's furniture around when you're visiting without their permission? You do that, you do this." And so it was since then that I decided to create my memes, my Sally Cat memes, to communicate this PDA, because we knew it was a big thing, but no one else even knew adult PDA existed, or even PDA Society at that time had nothing about adult PDA on their website. It was children, and then the adults disappear, they don't exist. And then there were people saying PDA doesn't exist at all, but we knew we existed. We could feel it so strongly. 100% it was a real thing, but we needed to communicate it, which is why I started communicating, and my counsellor training in how to express empathy in self-reflection as part of your training. That's gone into my meme production, and I was amazed how popular my memes have been. I just did them because I wanted to. And so here I am now at the end of that long journey. Thank you everyone for listening, and I can answer any questions. I will stop sharing there. Hello, Ruth, and everyone.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was very vulnerable, and it's so cool to hear your story as well. Um, I I have a few questions here, and then if there's anybody else that has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or we can just go from there. So one question is, can you talk a little bit about the obsession with people thing? Like you kindly briefly mentioned it about like going mute with a guy, but would love to
Oh,
hear
yeah.
a little bit about, because I know that's one of the traits that's kind of talked about and
Yeah, it
often,
is. It's an embarrassing one, to be honest, because, being PDA, I also want to be in control, but that's losing control. And it happened to me in Australia. It's happened all sorts of places. Normally, I think there's a chance with a guy. Um, and then I just sort of latch on. It's called limerence, technically, I've discovered, but it gets to the point, it takes over all my thoughts. All I can do is think about them, but when I'm with them, I can't talk, or I just get really stilted. If they try to tell me to back off, I can't. And so I end up driving them away. I have nightmares that I did this to some guy in Turkey, which I didn't. It's my latest nightmare, but the embarrassment and shame of it, the lack of control. The guy in Australia, I really repelled him from me in the end, because I just wouldn't let go. I wouldn't take hints. I kept insisting. And it's just horrible to be in that situation. And another thing I didn't mention is what I used to call my life dreams. I think it's called maladaptive daydreaming. That was all part of it as well. I don't have them anymore. As an aside, I think that a particular antidepressant I went on to initially, hoping it would improve my delayed sleep phase, not too much backstory. I've heard from others that that gets rid of maladaptive daydreaming, and I haven't had it since. And I'm quite pleased with that, because that all played into getting this limerence obsessions about people. And it's really unpleasant because it takes over your whole life, so you can't enjoy anything else. And it just leads to complete humiliation, really, as well. So, yeah, I'm quite glad not to have that.
yeah, that's really helpful. Thank
And there
you.
is, by the way, me and Brooke No Pressure PDA,
Mhm.
we've got the exciting news that JKP have agreed to publish a book we spent a few years writing. Most of the slowness was because of mutual demand avoidance, or basically me holding back because I didn't want to trigger Brooke. Um, So we've got there, and we're now actively in discussion with JKP about getting it formatted ready for publishing. And we've got some tips about handling limerence in there. But if you just Google WikiHow limerence, how to get rid of it, there are some really useful tips there, like um, reminding yourself that the person isn't perfect, focusing on their bad points, things like that. So yes,
Mhm.
any other questions?
Yeah,
Can I
absolutely.
can I ask you a question on that, Sally? Um, is there a difference between limerence and obsession about a person? Like, or obsession and limerence? Are
Uh,
it's different
I
or the same
I'm
thing?
not an expert. As I understand it, obsessions can be negative or positive. And I have had, I think, negative obsessions. I don't know if I'd phrase it like that, but I don't want to go off on a sidetrack. But limerence is always a positive obsession
Okay,
in the
that
fact that you
helps.
want the person. I've also had, I'll just say, total aversions to people, like complete aversions where I can't even bear to think of them looking at me, or I'll avoid entire parts of a city to not see them. But I think that is a correct obsession definition, but people can correct me if I'm wrong. It's all a learning process, isn't it? We're all learning together. And I've been learning so much from listening to other people's experiences rather than just saying, oh, you think differently, therefore you're wrong, and panicking. You need to listen even if it's uncomfortable. And that's how I worked out that there's different types of masking. You know, if someone says their experience is different, that's valid. So I think with all neurodivergency, we're very, very much at the start of understanding any of it. So, and we're all pioneers, sort of muddling our way together. So if we can share information and walk along together, we'll be a lot more empowered. But none of us have a definite answer to anything yet, and that's kind of exciting and daunting in equal measures.
Totally agreed. That's a great answer to that. Can you tell us a little bit, you mentioned it briefly, but can you tell us a little bit about the I think it's delayed sleep syndrome, is that what it's
Oh
called?
yeah, delayed sleep phase syndrome. Yeah, so that's it's a circadian sleep disorder, and some people say, oh, you mustn't call anything neurodivergent a disorder because of a social model of disability. I think that applies maybe to, shall we call it mainstream autism, but not to some other neurodivergence where it really is a disability. It basically puts me into permanent jet lag so that I live in Midwest American time, which is great for dealing with PDA North America. It's Central, you call it, don't you? Central, sorry, I don't know the jargon. Which means I just can't do mornings. Basically prevents me from doing mornings. And as I now have ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, I really can't go without sleep. So that means I can never be up with my daughter in the morning. You know, and that makes it feel very sad. I mean, luckily since I think it was 2013, the Circadian Sleep Disorders Network on their website have a DSPD, they call it Delayed Sleep Phase Disorder Q&A, which is designed to show to doctors. And so that's how I got my diagnosis of it and the sleep diary. But I showed it to my partner and he understood it. So he's been getting our daughter up every morning ever since. And oh, she freaks out. We're on holiday and I actually wake up before her. She really freaks out. What do you do that? You're not supposed to be up before me. How dare you? So yeah, that seems to be very, very common for neurodivergent people, including PDA people. It's very rare in the main population, but it seems to be very common for PDA families. And a related condition, which I think is worse, so I'm thankful not to have it, is non-24, which is where you have delayed sleep, but it keeps cycling forward. So you never know from one week to the next. Oh, hello. One week to the next, what time you're going to be able to function. Although the people in the non-24 group do say that the worst time is when they're awake all night, which is my permanent state to be in. And I put together a book about that in 2022, I think. Sleep Misfits. Again, all profits go to PDA Society, and that's available on Amazon. I recommend the print paperback book because that's got the illustrations in if you want to have a look. But yeah, that it's another little known invisible condition I joke, which make people assume that I'm lazy with no self-discipline like my PDA, but life dominating conditions, my PDA and my delayed sleep phase, they do define me. But in having accepted that they exist, I'm actually really happy and confident, high self-esteem, not depressed for the first time in my life, and really productive. So I think often all we need to do is just accept something, even if it's what we really didn't want to have, and everything's cool. We just work with it instead of feeling sorry for ourselves. So yes. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a very PDA situation happening behind me, but hopefully I can I can ask some of these questions. Actually, someone just chimed in the chat. I'll ask one of these. Someone says, "I'm a recently diagnosed PDAer. Thank you. It's amazing to see your acceptance and self-awareness. Are there certain sorts of therapeutic approaches that have been particularly helpful in untangling the trauma from the diagnoses and also opportunities for improvement?"
Okay, no, that's a good question. I did work with PDA Society a few years ago on their website. They've got an adult PDA section, which didn't exist when I first discovered PDA. And there's a bit on it about what therapies or whatever can be helpful for PDA. Personally, I've actually got a blog post I wrote as well about person-centered counselling fitting PDA, because the person-centered aspect is essentially PDA friendly. It's client-led. The counsellor isn't the expert. The client finds their own way. And I found that really, really helpful over the years. I've also practiced very, very brief mindfulness regularly after doing a course. But that course was good. That course I did in early 2015 through the NHS. I did it for free, a 6-week mindfulness group course. It was because of that I suddenly thought, right, like I've had enough. I ended up finding social accommodation and moved out of the city to the countryside. It completely coincided with that. And I carry on. My brief mindfulness is like about 30 seconds a day, but I do think it helps. It gets rid of my anxiety. I just quickly think through what's distracting me, do a few concentrations on my breathing. With my PDA brain, it's like about half a second's worth, and then I breathe thinking about my feet for another half a second, and that's it. And that really helps me. I do get help from, as I mentioned, an antidepressant, but from chatting with others, different antidepressants can have wildly different effects on different neurodivergent individuals. So what's great for one person, this exact same drug might cause someone else really, really bad side effects. So I've stayed on my antidepressant, which I mentioned I took because of my delayed sleep phase. Someone said it might help. It hasn't, but it's taken off the rough edges of my mood. So that's good. And I don't get any side effects. So that's good. But it's worth, if you do want to try one, just try a really small dose to begin with in case of side effects. ADHD meds have really helped me a lot. I got diagnosed in 2020 with ADHD, and I wasn't going to get the meds at first. I just was curious if I was ADHD or not. But my goodness, they have transformed my life. Mostly what I notice is that my mood has been lifted, but also my focus ability. I'm just churning out books now, which I couldn't before. I can finish projects, which I couldn't before, and that means so much to me. But yeah, I would just say I think a lot of people are scared of diagnosis. They're scared of what it might mean. For me, I had to really chase down my PDA diagnosis. People seem to imagine that in England, they just drop off trees like apples, but it's really, really hard to get diagnosed with PDA here. And it took me many years. There's been someone trolling me, deliberately lying, saying I wasn't really PDA because I didn't have a diagnosis. So it was really important to me. And when I got it, I was so happy. So for me, I didn't have a problem of, oh no, I'm diagnosed, how can I cope? It was more like, shall I have some champagne or whatever? So I think it's just, and I think for PDA people as well, if a diagnosis kind of gets put on to us, that's a demand, isn't it? And I think parents need to be very cautious of children, because best practice for autism is be completely transparent at all points and tell your child of a diagnosis. Do that with a PDA kid. My goodness, you're asking them to reject it, really is saying, look, here is the demand for you to accept that you're like this, and the PDA brain's going to say, no, I'm not. So you need to, with PDA, always, I think, follow your own instinct. That's veering off a bit. It's more like talking to parents, just saying, please be very cautious about how you might tell your child about their PDA. As for accepting it ourselves, I'm not a good person to ask because, like I say, I hunted down my diagnosis and I wanted it. How to accept a diagnosis I was given without asking for. I guess the best thing to do is just to say, okay, if it's real, it's real. But you need to discover it for yourself, I think, if you're PDA, yeah. So, read up on it and think, okay, maybe the diagnostician is wrong. Only you know yourself, and reflect and think, does this actually fit me? Could it be something else? And tell yourself that you don't have to accept it. Don't make it a big demand on yourself to say, yes, I agree with the diagnostician. And perhaps that stops the PDA from triggering. Okay, so anything else, Ruth?
Yeah, I can ask a few. There's someone is just noting that in the UK, PDA is locked behind your postcode by NHS.
Yeah.
Us, not recognizing it.
It's even not beyond postcode. It's because individual practitioners in the same place, some will recognise PDA, some not. So our daughter had her autism assessment and diagnosis upgraded to PDA. I say upgraded because I think of it as a good thing, when she was 5. But then when I asked for her to be assessed for ADHD in the same centre, the ADHD assessor, she'd put in a letter saying, Mum believes the child has PDA, despite the diagnosis coming from the same centre. So, yeah, it's... me and Libby had a Zoom with you last week, didn't we, Diane? And I sort of said to you somewhat cheekily, I think in America you've got this idea, this fairy story that PDA is so well recognised in England, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's just it was identified here. It doesn't mean it's widely known about or accepted, and it's mostly rejected. But please don't have nightmares because we're all coming together now, and it's all going on the up, and we're actually getting somewhere. I'm actively working with PDA Society as well as PDA North America. I'm very excited. In the conference, me and Libby Hill are going to be presenting about research, and we've got some very exciting stuff to share with people. So although we're pioneers, and that can be daunting, like I said, it's also exciting because we're there from the beginning. And now America's noticed PDA. It's really going to take off. So yeah, watch this space, folks.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. Can you comment on talking about PDA with your daughter? Because that's something that people often ask. And then there's a couple new questions in the chat too that Ruth will do. But
okay, yeah, so that's been a really difficult one. And often I think anyone who's a parent here or, close to a PDA child will know you have to go trust your instinct to the point that you're in extreme anxiety because you're totally going against what society and family expect you to do. And so many people in the PDA community even think, because it says autism, you're supposed to tell your child immediately. And if you're not, then you're a bad parent and you're a criminal. But my instinct was do not tell her. And that felt really bad. It was getting more and more stressful. But it was about her 4th birthday when she got her autism diagnosis. So can't really tell them then. And I've always talked with her. I talk about my own neurodivergence. And when she's in a mood, she'll listen and I'll talk about stuff. But then she'd always had sense when she'd panic. And when I got sent a PDA children's book by someone and she saw it, she looked at it and said, oh, that, and left the room. So she's aware of it, but she doesn't want to know. But I was getting more and more anxious about, oh my gosh, she's getting older. What do I do? But then when she was signed off from a child development centre, she had a video therapy meeting and I'd discussed with the therapist beforehand. Can't remember if she's a counsellor or psychotherapist, but I said, oh, please, she doesn't know about her diagnosis. I know it goes against what your best practice is, but explained why. So she suggested it to her, saying that her records show that she fits autism and blah, 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 blah. And she found that useful. But we've had to go against the grain of what people tell us is best practice. I've had people really angry with me in the PDA online community because of it. But yeah, you just have to follow your instinct and your own child. And some parents of PDA kids. They have followed the best practice as they think it, and then the child's completely rejected the diagnosis and we're saying we don't know what to do.
Right.
So yeah, PDA is never easy. I mean, as you saw from my presentation, I've done stuff in life, but I've never had a career. I've always been in awe of people who've had careers. How on earth do you do that? So I've done amazing things. I've run a disco in Turkey. I've set up the harm reductions stall. I've done so many amazing things, but I've never had a career. But what makes me happy is I've contributed to the world. I've changed people's lives. People say my Sally Cat stuff, but I've really helped them. That's wonderful. So I'm on disability benefits. I'm hoping maybe I can go self-employed soon with my PDA stuff, but disability benefits, I think I deserve them because I can't work, even if I don't match what people think of as disability. I've never been able to work, and I am giving back to the community in the way that I can. I'm not sure if I'm answering a question anymore. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, you did great. Well, it certainly seems like you have a career. I'm in awe of people who can draw. I mean, I just kept reminding myself of the slides, like I'm focused on your words, which were amazing. And then I'd be like, oh, and she drew this, like mind-boggling.
That's one thing, Diane. I had that sort of ended up in East Asia when I was younger with Max, and wherever I am, I can draw. So I have a biro and a scrap of paper. I could draw to pass the time, but I couldn't work. I couldn't earn the money for a ticket home, but I could draw. It's just a pastime for me. But yes, so Max's mum, she once said, "Oh, if I had your university education, I'd go off to London and have a brilliant career." I thought, but I can't, you know. So we're all different, and we can do what we do, and it's always going to be different. And I've maybe finally in my later life found what I can do well. And I was depressed before because I thought I should be able to do all these other things like wake up in the morning and meet everyday demands. Now I know I can't, then I can focus on what I can do.
Right. Yeah, it's
Someone
great.
just said, your resources are amazing, Sally. Thank you. I always recommend your resources to my clients and myself.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
thank you, everyone. I hope you've all enjoyed this.
Yeah, we have one more question
Yep,
for you.
that's fine. Yep.
Okay. Someone says, I'm a recently diagnosed PDAer. I found that more of the literature is aimed at parents for how to deal with their children, and that feels really invalidating as adult. How are you able to move past the uncomfortable language and continue your journey?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, when I first discovered PDA back in 2015, everything was for parents, and it was always framing the children as, quote, nightmare, close quote. And it's horrible, you know, it reminded me of my mum's acting as if her whole life was ruined by her nightmare children. And a lot of adult PDA forums, as I'm sure lots of people will know, are filled with mothers like that, saying how awful their horrible children are. But some forums, like the one Brooke runs on Facebook, PDA USA, saying bad stuff about the kids is not allowed. Also PDA Inclusive Universal, there's various groups where that's not allowed, and PDA adult voices have to come first. The book myself and Brooke have written, we decided we needed to target it to parents, which kind of went against the grain. And it's also targeted to an American audience. But it's written, we're PDA adults, and we write it. We also discuss adulthood, and we discuss things from the inside perspective. We are PDAers, so we talk about what it's like from the inside. So what all the different traits of PDA feel like, what they mean. We expand on them instead of what I hate is when I'm reading about PDA and people say they, like we're some kind of exhibit in a laboratory. They do this, they do that. We always talk about we do this. We are PDA. We PDA folk may. So hopefully that's more digestible to fellow PDA people like the person who made the question. And we're getting there slowly. There's more and more stuff available about PDA. It's spreading out from being parent only. So like I said, we're in pioneer stage. So we can just feel very depressed about that. We might as well just enjoy it and think, okay, it's growing. So that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I also always remind myself there's just so many societal pressures as a parent too, for your child to behave a certain way. And like that's what drives a lot of this language too, is just so much
Yeah.
Yeah, expectations. Actually, this kind of leads to another question was, oh, and one thing I did want to mention is we will be also be launching, talking about like more adult voices. We're also going to be launching a PDA Voices podcast in the next month or so. So we're very excited about that, and that will just be hopefully at least every few weeks we'll be launching a new one with an interview that's like an hour long with different PDA voices. And Sally, we would love to have you on that as
Oh,
well.
yes, please. No, I'd
Um,
love to. Thank you. How
right.
exciting.
Um, so another question was, can you give advice on anyone starting their adult journey? Which that's, and then kind of a sub question to it as, what about advice you might give to parents? We get a lot of parents coming to us that have just discovered PDA and their child is like 15 years old. You know,
Mm,
they're that teenager, they're kind of where you were at. So like if
mm.
your parents had gotten the information they needed at that age, you know, what would be good advice you could give them to try and help their child at that point?
Yeah, it's just the advice is just to follow your instinct. You know, it's going back to what I said before. Supporting PDA, being PDA, living PDA, and not being depressed and having a low self-esteem involves realizing that conventional wisdom, the way people expect everything to be done, it's never going to work for a PDA person. And the more the pressure's there that, well, you just have to get a job. I mean, I think you maybe saw from my presentation, there's no just have to get a job. You know, I was supported by a drug dealer for how to live. I shoplifted. So it's accept that PDA people who no amount of willpower or positive thinking from anyone, including the PDA person, is going to get them into a career. I think about maybe there's no solid stats, but possibly about 30% of PDA people do earn a living from work. Um, this ties with my own observation and peer research I've done in conjunction with PDA Society in 2018. They did a study of kids and they found that 70% of PDA kids weren't in mainstream education. And I think that tallies with adulthood. Um, and me and Libby are going to be presenting about research at the conference in March for PDA North America. And if you're on a low income, you can see it for free. So that's brilliant. And I'll be going into that research then in a fun and engaging way. That's my plan. So if you're discovering your own adult child's PDA or your own PDA as an adult, I think it's just accepting, okay, I am what I am, and that's okay. It's okay, I can't work. I've probably be feeling really shit with myself for not being able to work. And I can't do this, I can't do that. I'm likely to have other neurodivergent conditions because they do cluster. But that's okay. I can do other things. Understanding how the PDA brain works is very empowering. If I tell myself I've got to do something, I can't do it. I've learned just to, if I want to do something, I just sort of think about it a little bit and then I move on and I think about it a bit more and gradually I bypass that slumbering PDA dragon in my head and I find I can do it, but I have to keep it low key in my head. If I tell myself I really have to do that, it's never going to happen. So it's, yeah, just coming to accept ourselves and understand ourselves and work with ourselves, then we can do amazing things. That sounds a bit trite, doesn't it? Like some kind of pep talk. But we can. I think PDA people are by nature incredibly creative. I think we have to be just to live from day to day with our brains. Surely that forces us to be creative. So the creative muscles in our brains get supercharged. So we've got a lot of potential. We just need to do it on our own way in our own time. And that includes letting go our own expectations of what we think we should do. I hope that makes sense to people because it's what I'm saying, I think is true. It's just hard to put into words.
I
No,
think
you
you
put
said
it
it
into
really well.
words. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's also like there's just so much flexibility that's needed within PDA, whether you're parenting it or living it. And I think like even well, like even you saying like coming to terms with that you can't work, maybe it's, you know, even like that work looks different. education looks different. These things all are going to look different. And like having that acceptance around that as well, that like things are going to be different. Like, and we're lucky that we're in 2025 and things can be a little more flexible with our lives now. And people do work from home and there's just a little more, there's more homeschooling, there's more options than people had a couple
Yeah.
generations ago.
No, totally. I think it's great. And like I say, finally in my life, I think I might be able to go self-employed. And that would be so good, but I need to set myself up properly and also be very careful about the demand triggering nature of self-employment. But I want to be, so it's looking good on the horizon.
That's great. That's wonderful. I think that's all the questions. Was there anything else you saw, Diane, or anything else you wanted to chime in with?
No, there's just a lovely note. Maybe we can, somebody who this was their first PDA North America webinar.
Oh, wonderful.
So what a great one to do. And someone who, yeah, the same person's agreeing with your genius IQ score. Because
Thank you.
yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you so much. And we're so excited to continue to partner with you. And we look forward to having you at the conference this year with Libby, who is chiming in here as well. And
absolutely. And just and it's also a great reminder for us to keep adults in mind, even though parents have a lot of needs too, and just balancing the needs and not forget adults programming, because so often that does happen. But no, it was really inspirational, I think, and to people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Diane, and thank you, Ruben. It's brilliant being partnered with you. You're so inspiring as an organisation, and it's so exciting that America's discovering PDA, and we're at the heart of that. So that's brilliant. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to go and see my daughter and watch some TV now. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.